So as you can see, this video is titled Strafing Demystified. Maybe. Why did I call it this? Well, there's two reasons. First, I'm not sure that even being as good as I still am, I might not be able to figure out how to strafe now, because there's just too many cheaters. Like, you could find the best way to strafe, and 10 games later you would decide it doesn't work, because there's cheaters in half your 4v4 games. Pretty hard to figure out how to strafe when you're just constantly running into aimbots and deciding the best strafe doesn't work. So yeah, shit show. Secondly, when I was in my prime in 2008, I wasn't really conscious of what I was doing. I was just playing so much Halo that I knew what worked. And when I came back to playing the game a lot, circa 2013, I felt like my strafe never really came back. Like my strafe was never as good as it used to be. Because by 2013, I really was a shell of my former self. And so most of my guidelines in this video are actually the stuff I came up with later when I was trying to figure out why I wasn't as good as I used to be. So that's where the maybe part comes in. Because what I do now might not be the best way. And at some point, I'm going to go back and study some of my games from my prime and maybe revise some things and try to figure out exactly what I was doing. But the guidelines in this video are probably pretty close. And they should take you a long ways if this is something you're struggling with. And then the last part of the maybe is that some of this stuff may be more applicable to the 360, and I'm still trying to figure out the best way to strafe on MCC, because the game's just a lot easier now, so there's some adjustments we can talk about. So, I haven't watched too many strafing videos on YouTube, but it seems like all the ones I have watched, they just pretty much say mix it up, be unpredictable, be erratic, and that stuff is important, especially at close range, but it's not really necessary in Halo 3. Being erratic and unpredictable can work really well at short range, but with most of those videos you see, if you imagine shooting them, most of the time they're just not moving enough. Like by the time they set up doing something erratic, you've already shot them 3 times. And that seems to be true for most strafes like that I see, even once you get out to like the longer end of short range. So to start with, I would just recommend a static strafe. The two most important things in Halo 3 for strafing are the width and your cut timing. The longer the range, the wider your strafe needs to be, or people won't miss, and then your cut timing needs to be good. Just having a static strafe with the proper width and a decent cut timing is going to be enough to deal with like 90% of players, and if you focus too much on trying to be erratic, your strafe is probably going to end up too narrow, and you're not going to have enough initial speed, which is important to keep people from shooting you immediately. So like this first clip is a famous one from T-Squared, and you can see that he doesn't cut right away, and he keeps his initial speed, and then when he starts cutting. So what I mean by static is you're not mixing anything up. So strafe has two components. The cut, which is just when you change directions, and then I'm going to call each individual left or right movement a leg. So when I refer to a strafe as being static, I mean that the legs are approximately the same length. So we can see here that once T-Squared starts to cut back and forth, he's actually doing a static strafe, and then he breaks out of that pattern at the end. And yeah, that's a good one. You're going to have trouble hitting that on the 360. So again, a static pattern with a breakout. He keeps his speed up. He has a sharp static pattern that's nearly 1 full step wide, enough that his opponent's reticle can't just stay in the same spot and hit him, and then he has a breakout from the static pattern. A lot of my strafes do have mix-ups in them though, but for now we're just going to focus on the static aspect of this, because again, a really erratic strafe is not going to work at anything above short range. And what is an erratic strafe, right? It's just a combination of long and short legs and stutters, which are really just extremely short legs. So we can cover being erratic by just talking about mix-ups. So some more things. You probably used to be able to get away with more narrow strafing on the 360, since aiming adjustments at that scale were difficult, but they're not anymore. So if you're too narrow, you're just going to get shot. So when it comes to unpredictability, I break that down into 3 different types. The first is planned. This one I wouldn't worry about at all. This is when you've set up some meta pattern, like you've been going long right, short left, long right. So you go, next time I'm going to go long left, short right, long left. I used to do some of that when I was good, but I wouldn't worry about this one. Like maybe that's relevant at a high level, but I'm not even sure about that. And most of the people you play just aren't paying that much attention. And it was maybe more important on the 360 because the game was harder. Now people are just paying attention to you and making adjustments as you move. It's not as important to try and predict what someone's going to do. I'd actually like to see them reduce the aim assistance now. When you go back and play on the 360, the controllers are so bad and the game runs so bad. To keep the same aim assistance now is kind of ridiculous. I'd like to see them make it harder because it has compressed some of the skill ceiling now, for short range VR in particular. But yeah, planned unpredictability I wouldn't even worry about. The second type is much more important, and that's deliberate unpredictability. And that's like what we saw in this clip, where he's setting up a pattern within that strafe, and then he's deviating from it suddenly. That's more of what I would call a mix-up. It's not really planned in advance. It's just a deliberate mix-up within the strafe. With both of those types of unpredictability too, though, they're probably not quite as important as they used to be, because the game is so much easier now. Most VR battles are over much sooner, like between 4 and 6 shots. It's not like it used to be, when even at short range, or short medium range, you might be having VR battles that are 7, 8, 9 shots long, and within that, there would be a lot of opportunity for playing more games like that with your mix-ups, and it's just not like that anymore. And that's something that we'll talk about later. For now, focus on static strafing and just getting the width correct and your cut timing good. And then the third type of unpredictability is what I call intrinsic unpredictability. And this was the special sauce on the 360. And it's something that you just develop a feel for after you've played the game a lot. And this is mostly for short, medium range and below. There's a cut timing that throws people off, where they're making a final correction and they expect it to be accurate, and your timing is too close to their decision to aim and shoot for them to correct it in time, but it's also long enough away from when they're shooting that their shot's going to miss. There's a sweet spot in there, and that's what you want to try and feel. This worked better on the 360 because players were aiming with discrete individual movements, so you could really get them off the timing, and people are just aiming more smoothly on MCC, but I believe that optimal timing still exists, and it's definitely still relevant for the first shot, and this should make more sense when we see it in some of these clips, because sometimes on that first shot, it's just really obvious when they're going to swing their aim to you for the first time, and if you time this properly, you can still make people miss. So it's an unpredictability that's just intrinsic to the game and people's reaction time. And then the last thing here, these clips are pretty much arranged from shorter to longer range. Just pay attention to what my width is at the different ranges. And when I talk about ranges, I'm actually talking about pretty specific ideas for these. So I personally identify 6 different ranges. These are very short, 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 medium, medium, medium long, and long. So for each clip, I'll give you the category it falls into. So just to give these a definition of some sort, very short is so close that one player probably could close in for a beatdown if they wanted to. So here you want erratic, short, sharp. You can even do less than full steps, but full steps are fine too. Since you're close, longer legs may require your opponent to make a larger adjustment, and then partial movements are viable. So a partial movement would be either cutting before you reach top speed, or cutting from a leg where you didn't have the thumbstick pressed all the way. That's what I would call a partial movement. I don't use those very often. I'm just going to cut before I'm at full speed when I'm at this range. But that stuff can work because the slower you're moving, the faster your cut is. And then short, this is a range that probably can't be closed for a beatdown before somebody wins. And this goes up to like 10 yards, like on the pit, like second BR to green hallway. Partial movements can work here, I would say, on MLG. MLG is a little bit different, and we're going to talk about that later. But because you're faster, you can be a little bit choppier and maybe get away with some partial movements because your general speed is just higher. And then at short range, you want to be pretty sharp, and mixing up is important. But a sharp static strafe here can work really well, like we saw from T-squared. And then short medium, that's like the second BR to training, and I would define this range as somewhere around when leading becomes necessary to four-shot. Short medium, you should play pretty similar to short, but just a little wider. And then medium range, your strafe can get pretty wide, and it's going to work. Medium range is when the correct width and your cut timing become more important than mix-ups. This is like from second BR to the mauler, roughly. A narrow strafe at this range is very bad. This is also the range where zooming becomes beneficial. When I finally got a controller that has back buttons just a couple years ago, that's one thing I noticed, that I found myself zooming more. And then medium long is like courtyard to courtyard or S1 to S1. At this range, winning the zoom battle is really important. And if you're not zooming at this range, you're definitely not zooming enough. And then starting at this range, the width and cut timing go out the window. At this range, you should only cut when people start landing their shots. You should be trying to recognize when people are starting to land good shots, and that's when you cut, because then they have to get the lead correct again. And then long distance. This is the distances you get shooting across Sandbox, Standoff, Valhalla, and the larger maps. And again here, you're only going to cut after your opponent lands a shot. At these last two ranges, if you can get good at paying attention to that, and you practice your kick-out recovery, and you're resuming, you can become a problem at this range pretty quickly. So lastly, the three most common mistakes I see are moving forwards and backwards instead of moving laterally. You want all of your movement to be lateral. Having a strafe that's too narrow, and soft cutting. This last one, I feel like people have a tendency to move their left thumb kind of in time with their player motion, kind of lazily following it back and forth, and that's not what you want to do. That can lead to cuts that are kind of soft and aren't as sharp as they could be, and even though the difference doesn't seem like a lot in the theater, I do believe at the shorter ranges, this can be the difference between a strafe that works and one that doesn't, and that you don't want to follow your player model back and forth. You really want to jack the thumbstick back and forth. Like that, and it should feel like you're ahead of what your player model is doing. You shouldn't be following the player model. So yeah. And whether it's just more that this keeps you at a good width for short range, I feel like my strafe works a lot better when I'm doing that. So in my opinion, getting used to doing that when you're strafing is the sand the floor of Halo 3. So honestly, I would recommend just focusing only on that for like a week, or maybe even 2. You really want jacking the thumbstick back and forth when you cut to be second nature. You want to get to the point where you're just doing that automatically. And once that's second nature to you, then you can focus on your shooting. And what is an erratic strafe anyways? It's still just a combination of short and long legs. So by varying those things, which you should do a little bit, you can get something erratic without setting out to be as erratic as possible. So I would say for now, just focus on a static strafe with good fundamentals, and then work on that deliberate unpredictability, where you've established a pattern within the strafe, and then you're deviating from that. So let's go. I would call this short range, but it's getting close to being very short. So I did put a stutter in here at the start, but you can see this strafe is mostly static, and I have a nice width, somewhere in between what I would describe as a half step and a full step. And obviously the timing was giving him problems. So this strafe is for the second guy, and this I would call very short range. So here, you really just want to be erratic and jack that thumbstick, like you don't care if it breaks. Not much else to say about that one. Except that I wasn't just doing a short static strafe. Longer legs were okay here. And that's probably related to charging, and that's a technique we'll talk about later. This one is very short, and here again, this is just to see what I use for a width, and it's something that's a little less than a full step. This clip is short or very short, and one thing to notice here is that I don't really start trying to make moves until I've built up some speed, because if you try to get too fancy too early, you're just going to be standing still when they first shoot you. Like I've tried this before, where I'm just like, I'm going to throw them off immediately by cutting at the start of the engagement every time, but that actually doesn't seem to work very well. You just get shot because you're changing directions right when they start shooting you, and that probably seems to contradict what I was saying about throwing people off on their initial timing. But it just kind of depends. Sometimes you can just really see the timing of them turning towards you for the first time, and that's the timing you want to try and catch. But it doesn't happen every time, and if you just cut immediately every time, it doesn't seem to work very well. But I still believe there is that intrinsic timing between their shots that will throw them off, and you just get a feel for it eventually. But here, I make sure that I keep my speed up and cover some lateral distance before I do anything fancy, or in this case, before I cut and start doing my static strafe. This one is close to being static, but I vary my leg length a little bit here, and if anything, some of this is too narrow, but it still works, and this is short range. So this clip is for the second guy, and this is very short. And here, I just quickly establish a tight pattern, and then break out of it. This one is very short, and this is the first clip where you can really see me hit that initial timing, because I can see that his gun is off to the side, so I know he's going to make a large adjustment and then shoot, so I cut immediately. And he actually misses this first shot completely. That's the initial timing you want if you can get it. Here's where I can see that his gun is off to the side, so I'm going to cut. And now it's off to this side, so I'm going to cut. This is like short range, and it's for the second player. And in this clip, It's just obvious that I have that timing here too, and these players are running straight forward, which you shouldn't do. I stutter and mix things up a little bit in the first kill, but the second one is pretty static, and the guy's obviously having a problem with it. This one is short, and this is a good width, and I also hit the initial timing on this guy. Like here his aim is off, so I'm going to try and cut in time with him bringing his aim in line. This one is short, but it's getting close to short medium at the start. And here again, I have a little bit of variation in my leg length, but for the most part it's pretty static. This is short, and this one is pretty basic, just not going too narrow. It has to be a width that's larger than the reticle, and then a breakout. This is short, and here it's the same thing, just establishing a short static pattern and then breaking out. And my timing was decent on this one too. I know he's moving to acquire me instead of my teammate, so I cut immediately. And you can see when you have people really off their timing, at this range you're cutting with like every shot. This is short, just a narrow static strafe works in this one. This is short, and here I go kind of long on my first leg, and then I probably cut, because it seems like his aim is kind of off, or a little wild, and it throws him off so much that he throws a grenade in desperation.
Killing frenzy. Killing frenzy. Killing frenzy.
This is short, and here I cut immediately, because I can see that he's not aiming at me yet. And then yeah, it's just a one-step pattern, and then a breakout. This one might be short medium, so the main difference again from short is that I'm just going to be a little bit wider, but you can see I hit the initial timing at this range too. As I turn around, I can see that he's not aiming at me yet, so I'm going to cut immediately. And really the only difference there is that my strafe is like 2 steps wide instead of 1 or half, but it's still completely static. And that's what I mean about not having to be fancy, is that if your fundamentals are good, you can make people miss with a static strafe, especially at ranges that require leading. This one is getting close to medium. Here I'm mixing up short and long, and you can see that my long legs are really long, and your legs can be long at medium range, and it will work. And this would have worked without the short legs, because most people aren't good enough that you even need to mix up at this range. At this range, you can be wide, and it's just going to make them have to get the lead correct, which most people aren't very good at. So yeah, it's short, long, and the long legs are really pretty long for this range, but it works. This one is medium, and this one is pretty static, just at a good width, and I am in a regen, but you can see this guy's missing anyways. He's hitting me a little bit, but he's not landing any full bursts. And that's pretty wide. Like, because the game's easier now, people go too narrow with their strafe because they feel like they need to make something happen quickly because they're going to get blasted, but wider is still the way to go. Like here I'm really wide, and this really isn't that long of a range. This is medium. It's hard to see at this resolution, but I hit the timing on this guy, and then I just have a wide static strafe. I'm not being erratic. I'm not being unpredictable. I'm not mixing anything up. I'm just getting an initial cut that's a good timing, and then I'm strafing at the proper width. I can see he's shooting off to the right, so I'm going to cut. I'd say this one is getting close to medium long, and at that range, you want to zoom, and you don't want to cut until the guy's actually landing shots on you. Like I have that long leg in there, and I actually cut a little bit late, but I don't cut until I take a couple decent shots. This is medium long, and you can see again that I'm going really wide, and I cut back to the left because the guy starts hitting me, and that's all it takes. He doesn't hit me again after that. I'm stutter stepping a little bit at first, and that's probably why he was able to start shooting me in the first place, but as soon as I go back to being wide, he's just completely missing. This is medium long, and here it's just really wide, and I changed directions initially. I will do that at this range, expecting them to be accurate pretty soon, but this might have worked even better with a longer first leg. So that was the last clip for the fundamentals. I didn't put a long range one in there, but the rule for that is pretty straightforward. You just don't cut until you get shot. So here's some additional techniques that work. The first one is what I call jogging, and this works really well at medium and above. And this is when you're pretty much no shields. And this is abandoning cutting and continuing to move in the same direction and making your opponent get the lead correct to kill you. This works really well at medium long and long, because a lot of times when you're that low on shields, it actually makes you easier to kill if you cut that last time. So just continue the leg. And then there's the very technical bouncing your head off shit. When you're no shields, if you're somewhere where there's a low ceiling, and that's in a lot of bases, and famously on Construct, the little bridge to nowhere out in the middle, if you're in between the two levels of that, or on Icebox, out by the sniper spawn, if you jump and hit your head on the ceiling, there's just something about that messes with the hit registration and can make it really hard to land that last shot for some reason. Jumping against walls seems to work kind of the same way sometimes, like jumping into the wall or running into the wall, jumping up the wall, rubbing against the wall. These things seem to make me harder to kill most of the time I do them. Being on a ramp is the one exception to the lateral movement rule. If you're on a ramp, it's okay to incorporate forwards and backwards motion, so you're moving more at a diagonal instead of just laterally. I don't do this very often, but when it's a steep ramp, like the elbow on Blackout, or the ramps going in and out of the base on Heretic, there's just something about it that seems to make it work. Something about surprising people and making them have to make vertical adjustments that they didn't expect, and maybe because it varies your lateral speed. So try that one out. I don't do this on sloped ground. It doesn't seem to work as well, probably because it's usually not sloped enough. Gandhi hopping, if you're not familiar with that, that's just repeatedly crouching while you jump, and this can make the last shot harder to register too. I do this a lot now when I'm low shields. And then crouching. Crouching can actually work at short range, but I wouldn't recommend it. But I still do it sometimes, like right before a beatdown, to try and make their last burst miss, and when I know a player's good at short range with a snipe. So those are some techniques that you should be aware of. Now for the big caveat. Now that the game's so much easier, on vanilla, I'm not really sure you can make a great player miss at some of the shorter ranges. I feel like there's a range somewhere around short and short medium where a great player might just not miss anymore. And that's where some of this maybe from the title comes in, because I'm still working out some of this stuff for MCC. Either way, you should still try to make them miss at those ranges. And so, because the game is easier now, and because the VR battles are so much shorter on average, there are some adjustments that I've made, and that's what we're going to be talking about next. So the first two adjustments I made that worked are going wider with your strafe. If you go a little bit wider than what you would normally do, beginning at short medium, beginning at the range that you have to lead to 4-shot, start going wider than normal. So like at short medium, use the medium width, and this works okay. You might not be able to make a great player miss at short medium, but if you go wider, you force them to get the lead exactly correct. So you're just hoping to make their shots imperfect, and hopefully that gives you time to land a 5-shot, and it often does. And then the second main adjustment that I've been using a lot is the quick stutter, where I just have a really short movement in what I'm doing. Because the battles are over so quickly, I'm not trying to establish a pattern, or I don't have time to establish a pattern, or do anything really fancy. I'm just going to rely on one short movement to carry the entire battle, and this actually is enough a lot of times. So we'll just talk about that real quick. This is very short, and I put a stutter in here, and it works pretty well. So this one I have a really short step. And this one is pretty decent. This is pretty close to what I'm aiming for. It's maybe a little bit short, but this is pretty close range. Usually I want one that's a little longer than this, like a half step or even a full step. Like I have my standard width that I want, and then I want just a short like half step in there at this range. But a little bit longer range than this, I would want a full step. But that's like my one mix-up. That's the only thing I have time for, because people are just more accurate now. So yeah, doing everything the same, except for having one really short movement. So this one is the same type of thing, and this guy actually does pretty much the same thing I do. This might even be a copycat. This is a really minor stutter. It's more like a hesitation. And even though it works here, this is too short of a stutter. I really want like at least a half step or even a full step in the opposite direction. Here's an example of when I would use one that short, and this is to throw off a sniper at close range. I just stutter really slightly before the second shot. So this is something I would use when I know a player's pretty good, and they might hit that. If they're a bad player, I'm not going to try and throw them off with something that small. This one is kind of related, but this is maybe more like mixing it up. I just have some really short legs in here. And you can see the second player, his strafe is just too narrow to use it statically, but as a mix-up it's okay. So charging we'll talk about later. Pre-firing more is an adjustment that a lot of people have made, trying to find that little bit of an advantage now that the skill ceiling's compressed. It's self-explanatory, and I don't really use it that often. It's not that important in my opinion. But the last big adjustment that I've made is just to play a little bit more like it's a military shooter, instead of just running around in the open. I use cover more and stay closer to the map's geometry, like walls and corners, and this makes it a lot easier to use the peekaboo, and that's what we're going to talk about for a while. And this is one of the reasons I'm never going to YY after I throw a grenade, because when my sniper rifle is cycling, or I'm switching weapons, or I'm throwing a nade, I'm just dipping out anyways. And then I have nice initial timing on that last guy, so much so that it seems like he panic reloads. So here you can see the peekaboo, and what I'm not doing with this is doing it repeatedly in the same spot. Some people fall into that trap of being like, MLG Pro, I'm going to repeatedly play peekaboo at the same corner. That doesn't really work very well, because people are just going to time it and pre-fire you. Once it becomes obvious that you're just going to keep trying to do that in the same spot, and you're just trying to time it better than they are, the most effective way to use the peekaboo is to just do it once, often at the start of the engagement, but it can be in the middle too. And you're just going to do it once with the timing that you're expecting and before your opponent knows it's a pattern. So you do it once at the start, or you're doing it in the middle somewhere, moving behind a box or a tree or something really quick like that in the middle of the engagement with the timing that you're expecting but they're not. So you can get up that one shot that you need. Same thing here, I'm just going to do it once, right at the start, when he's not sure what I'm doing, and it throws him off quite a bit. Same thing here. I'm just going to go out of view when I'm dictating and expecting the timing. Same thing here, just dipping out real quick at the start, and you can see how fucked these people are, because they just have to guess your timing. And when the margins are thinner, getting up just that one shot can make all the difference. Same thing here, guy has no chance. Same thing here, dipping out quickly at the start and then winning the zoom battle, which was a lot different on the 360, probably because of the tick rate or whatever. Now, when a player's good, you just pretty much spam it. This is one in the middle of the engagement where I'm going to pass behind the tree, and it's again just a quick temporary use of cover that I'm going to try and time better than they are. I use this often on Heretic on the bridge. I call these parapets. And again, I'm not going to sit up there and play repeated peekaboo with someone who's just going to pre-fire me in the same spot and probably time it better than what I'm doing because I'm doing it blind. I'm just going to pass behind this briefly in the middle of my strafe and hopefully time that better than them and gain a shot. Here I just use the map geometry and I actually crouch just to go out of view below the slope, and then I use that to hide my cut. Here I use it to win the zoom battle, and it's pretty good for that. Same thing here. This guy gets away, temporarily, but same thing. Same thing here. So these next ones are some wall collisions. This one isn't so much about the collision, it's just about unexpectedly moving towards the wall, and this throws people off sometimes too. When you're already close to the wall, people don't expect you to go that direction. And you can see that in a lot of these, I am putting in that one little stutter step. Here too, this isn't so much about messing with the shot registration, but it does do that too. But it also just makes your motion kind of weird and difficult for people to predict. Same thing here, not really about the shot registration, just about it being weird motion. These last four are about charging, and this is something that we'll probably talk about more in tactics, but this is what I call it when you move towards the opponent instead of just laterally, and you're doing it because there's an opening to create an awkward angle, and I do this to both players, and then after you create the awkward angle, that can make your follow-up cut more effective, and we'll see that here. So the first charge is this initial movement right that I make because of how this player is moving, and then I cut once they start adjusting to that. And then with the second guy, I'm giving him an awkward angle that he has to deal with, and then after I land, I'm immediately cutting the opposite direction. So I would classify what most of the Twitch streamers do, where they just play really aggressive and just try to create awkward angles by just jumping at people and stuff like that. And that actually works pretty well. This strafe is pretty narrow, maybe too narrow for MCC, and then I charge the second guy. Same thing here. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Like I said, this video is a maybe. I might go back later to my old gameplay and really study if I was doing anything besides this, but this pretty much covered what I'm doing now. MLG is pretty much the same, but you can be a little bit faster because you can cut faster and because you want the same width. The width of the different ranges shouldn't really be different, but you have to play faster to keep those widths the same. And yeah, you can be a little bit weirder and sharper and more erratic, incorporating things like partial movements, but it's really not that much different. A static strafe with the proper width and a grasp on that intrinsic timing can take you a long way. And then the extra techniques and those MCC adjustments, if you can work those in, you're probably going to improve. And yeah, mix-ups, the stutter step, that stuff's great. And that's how you can be erratic, by mixing short and long without being like truly erratic, because it's really just a different name for the same thing. And I feel like trying to be too erratic is just going to make your strafe too narrow at most ranges. Now go sand that floor